Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, the Blended Podcast, and the founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm so excited to be partnering once again with the team at Anaplan. We kicked off 2025 together with a webinar all about integrated business planning. So how amazing to be kicking off another new year with them today. Anaplan also was featured on Let's Talk Supply Chain back in November 2025. That was episode 499 if anyone missed it. And they have another episode dropping next week. So be sure to look out for that one as well. But today we're diving into probably the biggest supply chain hot topic right now. And that is AI. I know everybody's talking about it, and rightly so. It's going to be mission critical for supply chain transformation. But behind the hype and the few visible success stories, we're seeing example after example of stalled pilots, siloed experiments, and disappointing returns. Investment in AI needs to happen, but businesses need to think much more strategically about where and how AI fits into their operations if they're going to achieve impact. And we're going to be helping you with that today. We're going to be cutting through the noise to share the trends that will define our industry in 2026 so that you know where to focus your AI efforts. And we'll be exploring how Anaplan could help you drive supply chain decision excellence through AI-driven planning and dynamic scenario modeling. So remember to share your questions in the comments. I also want to know where you are tuning in from, because we will be looking at that. We're going to be giving you shout outs. We're going to be answering some of those questions throughout the show. Plus, we love a good fire emoji. So if you are enjoying the conversation, make sure to add a fire emoji into the comments. We are live streaming across Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So feel free to comment within the platform that you're on. And also, we've got a QR code at the top of the screen. And I would highly recommend you go and click that link to learn a little bit more about Anaplan as we move through the conversation. So today I'm joined by EJ Tavella, EVP GM Integrated Business Applications at Anaplan. Welcome, EJ, to the show.
Thanks, Sarah. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. I mean, let's be real.
Fire emoji, right? I mean,
I know. I love fire emojis. So yes, we want to see some fire emojis in those comments.
Yep.
But, I talk about AI all the time. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I'm not talking about AI in my business. And then also AI from a technology standpoint, but then also AI and the role that it's playing for supply chain professionals and leaders. And so I'm excited to dive into this a little bit more with you today to find out how you're thinking about it and, so much more. We've also got a white paper that's coming up a little bit later. But before we do that, why don't you tell us about yourself, talk to us about your role at Anaplan, and maybe a bit of a background on your career journey.
Sure. Appreciate it. So super excited to be here. I think I'm a huge fan of the podcast / these live sessions. I think it's a great way to learn. It's a great way to just kind of understand how people are coming at and approaching the latest challenges that we're trying to deal with in supply chain today. So I've been a supply chain guy for almost 28 years now. Started early career in consulting, went into industry for a few years, both in online commerce back in the 90s, as well as high-tech supply chain. Founded a company called Steel Wedge in the early 2000s to solve sales and operations planning. We're kind of the first players out there for sales and operations planning, and really came at it with an approach of how do we get the less technical supply chain folks involved in the process? How do we connect the dots across sales, finance, supply chain, et cetera? I transitioned from that back to consulting in 2015 to a firm called End-to-End Analytics. And we ended up getting acquired by Accenture. And so I spent the last 10 years sort of pivoting from supply chain to sort of what I'll call analytics-enabled supply chain. So end-to-end, and my role at Accenture was really focused on how do we take advanced analytics and integrate that into supply chain strategy. And back in 2015, that was kind of the early days in those conversations. There was a lot of confusion around it. What is it AI? Is it analytics? Is it ML? This was obviously before Gen AI and agentic stuff, which we'll talk about today. But as part of all of that, and the reason I get into the detail there is we were building out custom analytics solutions for big companies or Fortune 500, high tech firms, retailers, et cetera. And we realized, hey, if we could build these solutions on a platform that would scale, get a lot more traction. The customer would actually get more value. IT would appreciate it versus be concerned about having custom systems. And frankly, selfishly, my team wouldn't have to support it as much. And we surveyed the market. We fell in love with Anaplan. So we found Anaplan in 2016. And so before I joined Anaplan, I spent almost 8 years implementing really large scale solutions for global, Fortune, again, 50 size companies, Google, NVIDIA, Lululemon, and others, right?
Yeah.
That integrated analytics with the supply chain problem statement. So I had a really strong appreciation for how Anaplan worked and the value that it could deliver before I joined. I joined Anaplan about 2 years ago, and the role that I'm in, I originally joined to run the supply chain business, supply chain applications. And the vision was, look, how do we go from having this wildly flexible platform to how do we have out-of-the-box best practices? We've got 25 customers now. We know what they're doing. They shouldn't have to start from scratch. We can give them something that really brings together the best of the best, brings their data in, and delivers value with integrated analytics. And so I joined to help build out that business model with out-of-the-box applications. And we've scaled that over the last couple of years. And I recently got promoted to EVP of all of the applications. So I run the
Congratulations.
Now, so it's exciting. We're seeing massive traction. We've sold 300 plus of them in the last couple of years. And it's a great way to deliver analytics into the business with customers.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've been passionate about breaking down those silos since early 2000s, and you've kind of been on that mission. So I love to hear that, because sometimes we work in silos here in supply chain, and I feel like we're still trying to break down those silos.
Yep. And we still are, by the way. It's been 12 years, and it's still happening.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I want to give a shout out to Yatharath over on my personal LinkedIn. We've already got a couple of fire emojis, so they're loving this conversation already. Let's talk about your new role. And congratulations, by the way. You're head of Anaplan's integrated business applications. So you must have a lot on your plate. What are some of the biggest challenges or KPIs that keep you up at night?
It's a good question. So I'll say internally, it's a pivot organizationally, and it's a pivot that we've made, I think, really well over the last couple of years. But on my plate is really just thinking through, I think, probably three key things, right? One is, how do we start to bring a truly integrated, connected solution to our customers and sort of break down the silos? So to your point earlier, I think we're in a rare position to be able to truly bring a single platform out that can deliver super powerful supply chain scenario modeling, demand planning, supply planning, S&OP, procurement analytics, et cetera, but also then connect that into things like trade promotion planning. Hey, connect that into things like, the financial planning impact. What does the margin cost look like based on these decisions? And then all the way into things like workforce planning too. So, great. How do I understand if I'm going to deliver these things to these stores? How do I make sure I've got the right team on the ground at the store to receive the product and put it away, and make sure we've got the capacity at the DCs to handle the inbound and the outbound freight and things like that too. So that connected solution, and really thinking through across our organization, as well as working super closely with customers on how do we make that happen in a really seamless way, in an integrated way. So that's one. I think second big one is really integrating analytics into that process. I think I'd like to change the name of our group from integrated business applications to intelligent business applications soon. At the end of the day, AI is at the core of what we do. And I think we have this rare opportunity to be able to take AI and analytics, and maybe we get into this later as we go through it, but defining analytics is an interesting thing, I think, when you talk to customers, because you've got everything from good old fashioned math, right? Statistics, et cetera, to AI, ML, functional analytic models, could be simulations, could be Monte Carlo, could be, other sort of advanced neural network-based forecasting models, right? And then you've got this sort of what I'll call modern day agentic Gen AI democratization of access to data that is changing how people interact with the models too. And so when I walk into customers, part of it is how do we make it really easy for our customers to understand what they want, what they truly want, and also how we deliver that value to them with the different analytics at the right time, at the right place. Because I think there's a place for all three of those types of analytics, and they really need to work seamlessly together if you want the best of both worlds. So we spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we need to define what success looks like. And that's not the same for everybody, right?
Yep.
And I think it's important for everybody on getting on the same page about, what are those metrics? What does success look like for us down the road? What are the analytics that are going to contribute to that? What are the metrics, right? But I think also we miss kind of the mark around training on how to speak to the large language models, et cetera, to be able to get the information that you want out of it. And so I think we're probably going to talk a little bit about that, but I just wanted to put that key point there is that we do need to see a little bit more training, I think, for teams to be able to interact and communicate with it. So conversations, like I mentioned at the beginning of this show, around AI have definitely been ramping up this year, but it's slowly becoming clear that there's a gap between hype and there's a gap between the reality of it. Mm-hmm. And so the conversations I've been having in the last 3 months have shifted to looking at how we bridge that gap, go back to basics a little bit. I even had somebody on a show a little bit later on last year that said we need to slow down to speed up, right? So what's your take on all of this? Like, where do you think the industry is really at, like, today when it comes to AI? What are you seeing with your customers?
Yeah. I think it's the right question to ask. And I think you kind of hit on it with some of the metrics that how do I track performance? What is the value we're driving? Because AI it's definitely the hype. I think it is something that if you're not talking about it in the process with your customers, you're missing the boat, right? Mm-hmm. You're not included. But what I'm seeing all the time is when you start to go from, okay, great, here's what we want to do. How do I inject AI and analytics into that? And you get to the brass tacks, we still have this question of explainability, right? So this has been a problem for years with just forecasting. So people are like, well, great, I've got forecasting or I've got optimization. It's giving me an answer. I don't understand it, or I don't believe it, or I don't understand, I don't have enough explainability behind it, so I'm not going to use it.
Right. I mean, or maybe it's provided, a solution or an idea that is so outside of your comfort zone that you may or may not want to, actually trust it.
Yeah. So for years, like optimized based inventory models have been less than successful at so many companies that I've walked into because the engine may work, but there's only 2 or 3 people in the company that actually know how it works. And so the average planner just sort of throws it out and does it manually, and they don't know how to tune it going forward. And so, in the same sense these days with now new Gen AI, so we're talking about an agent giving you an answer. You ask a question, an agent gives you an answer. If you don't understand how they got to that answer, like I think the big concern in the real world is people are like, well, can I trust that answer I got? And why do I think if you're not going to trust the forecast that now is proven and really works to let that run and you're changing it all the time, what's going to make you trust the agent's response to you going forward? And so training is a huge thing, right? And part of that is making sure we're training the agents. Like, so there's a ton of work around how to train Gen AI and agents so that it is, it is really, really accurate. And I think accuracy and explainability becomes more important than, maybe more important than the next feature or function, right? So what we're finding all the time is you have to almost sort of like harden it and dumb it down so it can't give you an answer that's wrong. It gives you right answers, and it's explainable because they'll actually use those versus it might give you a little bit better answer, but if it can't be explained, it's not going to get used.
Well, and also it comes down to data quality, right? Yeah. What are you putting into, and that comes down to also the training and the communication of how we're asking the questions and how we're asking for the solution and et cetera, et cetera. And so that is kind of, I feel, the foundation in the fact that we need to make sure that what we're talking to it about, the data that we're ingesting into it needs to be high quality data. Otherwise, you may or may not get the right answers that you're looking for. And also, I think we get caught up on right answers too, right? There's really no right, wrong answers. It's really about how much risk you want to spend. How many risk dollars do you want to spend, when these options, these solutions come to you? Now, I want to piggyback on that conversation around, where is the industry really at? But I also want to ask you, like, what is AI actually capable of right now in 2026, realistically, right? Because there's a lot of things floating around.
There's a lot of things out there. So I want to circle back first to your point on data, because I think it's worth a couple of minutes.
Sure.
And we are spending a ton of time on building out what we're calling, a unified data model and a data ontology. And I think it's always been a challenge for customers, but being able to have the infrastructure within the data to not only have accurate data that you can use as input into it, but have the system actually understand the relationships of those data. So how do I translate from a hierarchy that's a supply chain hierarchy to a financial hierarchy? Or to a sales hierarchy. So how do I translate from what's the bookings forecast to what's the sell-through forecast to what's the revenue recognition forecast? And how do I leverage that data and have the system understand that in the back end? And so I think there's been a huge investment we've been making around this data ontology to be able to have that infrastructure layer in place. Because what we've found when we start to layer in Gen AI and agentic type tools on top of it, if you don't have that in place, then the Gen AI tools don't work very well, right? They don't understand the data. They don't have the reference model. They don't preconceive and understand how you translate from a sales plan to a financial plan to a supply chain plan, for example.
Well, and that could look differently for different people on how they translate it too. But also at the end of the day, you are entering into a partnership. And so the fact is that the quality of data needs to be high for Anaplan just as much as it has to be for your customers to be able to help them.
That's right. Yep.
Right.
We've got to expose not only internal data and have that be right, but it's also got to be able to get exposed to external data. If you really want to use, to your point, on the capabilities that are now available, like to really get the juice out of it, you got to be able to not only connect internal data, which is hard enough, but connect external data too to start to look for insights.
Yeah. So what are the capabilities of AI as it stands January 2026, EJ?
Yeah. So I think, that the traditional functional analytics have really started to get very robust, right? So when I say that, it's like demand sensing, advanced scenario modeling, doing risk-based analytics, truly using neural network-based forecasting models that are able to bring in external data, look at events, look at Google Analytics type data, and truly come up with really advanced forecasting models, as well as dynamically demand sense the changes in the model over time. So that the ability to ingest huge amounts of data into these forecasting engines, for example, and bring in external data has really advanced over the years. I mean, we used to have battles back and forth on, hey, when is ML forecasting better than good old fashioned statistics? I think it's definitely gotten to that point. So that's a huge breakthrough. Those are things that are super exciting. And then things like autonomous scenario modeling. So great, once I've got that in place, now how do I run scenarios, and how do I have the engine actually start to run many scenarios that come back with recommendations? So it's the next version of Monte Carlo simulation, right? And GoalSeek, but sort of at an advanced level that looks at the impact across the business and can run scenarios and give you results back.
Which is really gold. Because at the end of the day, there's no risk necessarily in that scenario modeling. And the fact that I'm going to put, the craziest idea maybe out there to see if it would work. And then you can simulate that before actually putting into reality and practice where you're actually spending hard dollars on that. Now, before we move on, I do want to give a shout out to Barma, Ashok. We've got Abdhesh. We've got Joseph over on our Let's Talk Supply Chain Instagram. We've got Rima over there as well. And we are just killing it with the fire emojis. EJ, everybody's loving this conversation. And we've got a whole conversation about weather as well in the comments too. So everybody's having a great time. They're having a great time. All right.
I love it. Hey, on that point on the 2026 too, like going from functional analytics to more Gen AI and agentic pieces, that is becoming very real too. Like it is, and it's a different type of value proposition, but it is the ability to democratize access to data. At the end of the day, in statistics and forecasts have been going on forever, but the ability to ask a question and not have to go into a user, dashboard, right? But like go to your phone and ask a question. Hey, what are the top 5 issues today? Or what are the top, 6 moving products today that have the biggest gaps in the forecast? And have agents or have Gen AI give you an answer like that, or generate a report for you, and then double click and ask the next question. Okay, what's causing those biggest issues? That, I think we are seeing that live in systems today, really, really working and giving people access to data that was probably in the systems before, but maybe not super easy to get to. And I think that's going to change the ways of working and make things just run faster and sort of make things more efficient. Very, very. And agents will double down on that to make recommendations, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Veronica said, we can't expect AI to be the SME. It's a tool for the expert, not a replacement for them. And if you can't explain the why behind it, the trust isn't there, which I really like. It's in 2 parts. That's why I didn't put it on the screen. But we've got some really great comments in around what we're talking about today. Gopi says, AI needs to be trained to understand the complex relationships available between the available data and decisions as well. So really great conversation in the comments. Now, I want to get into some of the bigger trends that are standing out for us right now. And I want to start with cognitive twins and prescriptive simulation. Now, we kind of touched on this already as some of, where we are as an industry for January 2026. But I think, we're still in a place where many teams' planning processes, capabilities, they're still lacking, right? You did mention that. We're still seeing a lot of spreadsheets. I was actually talking to somebody the other day that there are still spreadsheets out there, professionals are still using them. What's the impact of that on businesses as they're thinking about moving away from a reactive to a more proactive approach to decision making? And almost like, I think right now this is all table stakes. Like, this is not, something in the future for companies or organizations or supply chains professionals anymore.
It is here and now. The scale is here. The data tools are here. But to your point, Sarah, like Excel is still out there 100%. Like, I walk into, again, Fortune 50 size companies all the time, and they're like, yeah, we do this and this in a tool, but we still do these 7 other steps in Excel.
Right.
And so, you hit the nail on the head. People are still drowning in spreadsheets, and it's sad. I think Excel can be amazing, and Excel is great. It's flexible, but if you really want to start to automate the process and you want to sort of take advantage of the volume of data that we have in analytics, you got to move beyond Excel. Excel tends to be very reactive. Obviously, like, you've got all the error-prone things it can break. It tends to be very siloed. You don't have any real institutional memory there. And I think, look, at the end of the day, we're coming in and replacing Excel all the time. And I think the key to replacing Excel is giving customers something that they're comfortable using, right? And so,
exactly.
It can't be one of these kind of calculators that nobody knows how to use. It's got to be something that's easy to use. Otherwise, they will revert back to Excel, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And they've been using it for years. Let's just give Excel credit where credit is due. They have been using it for a long time. They're used to it. They know how it works. They can predict how it's going to work or not work. And they can troubleshoot if something isn't going well on the spreadsheet, right? Like, those are the types of things that, really go into play when we want to put a technology in somebody's hands that we've got to think about when it comes to that change management piece. Now, talk to me about exactly what that cognitive twin prescriptive simulation technology, how is that different to some of the twinning and simulation that is out there right now? And what are the capabilities of this? What does it mean for supply chains, professionals, leaders, etc.?
Yeah, there's always the latest and greatest term floating out there. Is it a digital twin? Is it a cognitive twin?
Can we stop doing that?
Because how many new terms are we going to have out here, right? It's like,
we confuse things. We don't need to confuse things. We don't need any more acronyms. I've got a dictionary with 107 of them already for supply chain. We don't need new terms. Let's just stick with 1 or 2.
Yeah. For every time I've had to sort of, okay, so do you want a control tower? Do you want a digital twin? Like, what is it really, right? at the end of the day, all of those things, I think what we're moving towards is having the ability to simulate your supply chain and the connected processes, right? So downstream processes impact on, again, workforce, upstream processes impact on what's the sales pipeline impact on it, how do trade promotion plannings impact it? Build out that overall network, understand what that network looks like, and then start to run intelligent analytics across the network, right? I think at the end of the day, to get it right, you've got to be able to have a sort of a digital version of your supply chain that can take into account what your current planning assumptions are, as well as what your current execution, actions are, right? And ideally start to bring in external data as part of that as well. Like, is there something upstream or downstream in our supply chain that is going to impact it in advance? And that could be EDI feeds or other types of feeds from transportation. That could be something else happening in the world that we know is happening in a given region that we know our manufacturing's at, right? So, sort of, connecting all those pieces in one place is this nirvana of getting to it. I think our best customers are doing that, but it is a journey. To your point on data, you got to get data. It doesn't just happen magically, and the tools can make it happen faster now, but you still got to find that data. You got to connect it together.
So it's not necessarily just about the quality of data. It's where you have the gaps in the data of what you need to be able to really run the scenarios that you want to run to find out where that risk is so that you can make the right decision.
Yeah. And you got to live in the real world where we've got customers that have, not just 2, but maybe 20 different ERP systems. Right? They've acquired different businesses. They have different regions.
The tech stacks are crazy.
Yeah, 4 or 5 different legacy tools. Some of them get down to some level, XYZ level of detail. The other ones get down way more granular detail. What level you're going to plan at. And so you do need to think about organizationally, how do we want to manage that process, and what level is good enough? And you need a tool on the back end that's flexible enough to say, great, like here's our common level of planning, our blueprint we might have that says we're going to get everything down to this level of detail. We're going to capture these key metrics and follow this process. But in certain industries or certain, sub businesses, I can go down to way more detail because I've got it available. Well, great. And then let's go backwards, sort of have a North Star vision of where you're going to, and work backwards to get the other businesses down to that level of detail too in the future.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the next one in line that I want to go into. And I want to let everybody know we're going to do audience questions probably in about 15 minutes or so. Rudy, I see your questions. We also have some other ones coming in as well. So keep them coming and we'll get to them in a little bit. So the second one I want to ask you about is autonomous procurement and supplier negotiation.
Sure.
I was discussing data from an industry report recently that indicated that supply chain professionals want AI to be a partner, something that works alongside them more proactively. But at the same time, like we were talking about before, they struggle with trust, right? So where do you think that this trend fits into that paradox? And what does, autonomous procurement, supplier negotiation, how does that impact the supply chain and the business? What does this all look like? What is the benefit?
Yeah. It's a bit of a mess in the field. And I would say there's a huge opportunity there. We've done a bunch of research around where the problems are and what the value is to doing it right. And to define the term, right, I think it is going from, great, how do I start to strategically plan my supply chain from a procurement perspective? So how do I take my short, medium, and long-term plans and translate that into procurement needs? And that could be key raw materials, key commodities. That could be taking in new design elements from our design teams or engineering teams to say, great, how are we transitioning different products? So connecting the planning information to the procurement team, so they've got visibility into the future. They're not just becoming reactive. I think you go to a lot of procurement organizations, they're super reactive, they're super siloed. Somebody throws something over the fence, says, go buy this, right? So how do you get them proactive on it? And then how do you take that proactive process and start to automate the communication with the suppliers? How do I double click and navigate the SKU and minimize the SKU proliferation, for example, at the component level? When I get asked to go source a given product, why don't I first use analytics to go survey my set of products that are already available? Could I use something that's already in my network? Do I have a supplier that already supplies that's certifiable, blah, blah, blah. Like, and here's the recommendations before I go back and do it. Here's 3 things that we think are within, X tolerance of what you're already asking for. Can we just use one of those? Right.
Yeah.
If not, great. How do I now automate the process with the suppliers to source those products, to make sure I'm accelerating what that cycle looks like. So it shrinks that cycle for sourcing, but it also gives you better results faster.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like we're talking about today, AI can be brought in a variety of different ways to the supply chain in a variety of different ways, right? Procurement is just one aspect of it. And when we look at forecasting and planning and we run through the gamut of supply chain, that's where a lot of people get overwhelmed, I think, is the fact that there's all these great tools. Where do I start? And I think there was a question in the comments a little bit earlier that we're going to get to later to talk about that, because I think that's also important to talk about. But you talk about connecting and you're talking about breaking down these silos. Like, I can't believe we're still talking about silos in 2026.
Yeah.
And when are we really going to get it together and make sure that it's all connected so that we can be proactive and we can make the right decisions as well. And so we've got a question over there on YouTube. I want to let everybody know, I mentioned a white paper at the beginning of this conversation. It's called Finalizing Supply Chain Decision Making, and it goes into a lot more of what we're talking about today. So if you click the QR code in the top right-hand corner, or you go to the comments, we have a link in the comments for you as well. Go ahead, check that out, and go get yourself a copy, because I think, it's going to extend the life of what we're talking about today, and something that you can take and move forward and bring to your teams as well. So make sure you go and do that. Now, AI and connected planning. I mean, we started off kind of talking about this. This is really where you have shown that it can shine, right? In the fact that success metrics, bringing everybody together. What are the competitive advantages that a business can gain by integrating planning across supply chain, finance, sales, and HR? And you've been doing this since 2015. So I'm sure that's changed between then and now. But what are the competitive advantages in 2026?
Yeah, we did a study recently, an independent study of 400 plus companies and Fortune 1000 kind of size organizations, and looked at the value of connected planning, right? So, okay, great. If how siloed are we? Do we have the ability through systematic tools to make decisions between finance, sales, workforce planning, supply chain, et cetera? And how good are you at doing that? And when we overlaid those results and we started to correlate that back to basically shareholder value, what we found was that companies that were great at connecting decision making were seeing 14% improvement in shareholder value over that were not connecting decisions. So it's a different way of thinking about ROI, right? It's not a, hey, how much inventory did I reduce, or what was my forecasting accuracy? But it was truly looking at the shareholder value of these overall businesses. And I think that's the way that we need to start thinking about these kinds of business processes and tools. When you think about connecting the business together, it's really getting to driving overall shareholder value, and that's going to be reflected through obviously reduced cost of goods sold and improved revenue. But it's really that overall picture that we're looking for. And so I think there's a huge pot of gold at the end of the rainbow if you do it right. And that's where we're focused on. Our customers, our best customers, are doing this stuff and seeing that happen today.
Well, especially at 14%. I mean, 14% is a big number when you're talking about shareholder value, and you're really talking to, the C-suite in any organization as to this is what it could look like if you're willing to A, put in the work, B, put in the investment, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So I want to go back to what we were talking about, data, right? We already talked a little bit about data quality. I want to talk about data foundation, because if that's the critical foundation piece, if that's the critical thing that everybody needs to make sure that they get right, and I'm not just talking about your clients, I'm talking about the technology partners as well, to make sure that everybody has the highest quality data to be able to help drive some of these solutions and decision making. But I think building one like a data foundation is a major undertaking in itself. So what level of data do you think is required to achieve value from AI? And I want to put this into perspective with that in mind. Like, what is the first action a leader should take to build a data foundation they can actually trust to run an AI-driven business? And I don't think we ask this question enough. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
It's a great question, and again, I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I hate to say it, but like I don't know that it's changed all that much.
Okay.
In that it is super important,
Mhm.
and really in my mind, the first step to your question on it is get started. The first step is do something. So don't
Do
like
something.
analysis,
That's right.
like not analysis paralysis, and don't have the expectation of like, perfection. Like make progress over perfection.
Mhm.
And what I've found to be the case in many instances is, doing these kinds of programs where you say, great, I'm going to set up, let's just say demand planning is where you want to go. Like, let's say you have this North Star vision, right? You want to get to this truly connected planning story, right?
Mhm.
And you don't have the data in place today. Great. Like, let's put a journey in place and let's figure out where's the right place to start. Where do you have the data in place? Do you have the data you need for demand planning right now? Do you have
Right.
historical actual sales? Do you have the sales pipeline information? Do you have the trade promotion information, et cetera? Start there and use these kinds of planning programs to actually help you drive the acceleration of getting data aligned. Because
Mhm.
what I find is when people build data lakes in a vacuum, they often become science projects, and they're done with them and they kick off these projects. Like, we've got all our data, it's all in a data lake, and they realize, oh shit, we hadn't actually figured out how to connect the dots. We hadn't really thought about how we needed to have those relationships defined, and so it ends up being a lot of rework. And so
Right.
doing it with intention, with what your goal is in mind up front, makes a huge difference in accelerating those processes. And there are amazing tools out now to help you to capture that data. Like, where we used to have problems with just what level of detail can we capture and what level of detail can we use in these tools, those things are going away really fast, right? I mean, we're loading in, for retailers, we're loading in store SKU level, transactional level details, right?
Mhm.
So that's the kind of stuff that you can do. We've invested a ton in our data platform. We call it our data orchestrator, and that's
Mhm.
where our unified data model is. And I think that those kinds of tools can help customers also bring that together really quick. We're not always the data lake, but we can be.
Mhm.
I think that you gotta start the journey somewhere, and if you don't do that, you're going to be behind the times.
Yeah.
And then I think
Well,
the
I
other,
think also what we said earlier about understanding where your gaps are in your data,
yeah,
of where you need to bring in other data to be able to give the full picture. But I was chuckling because you said science experiment, and I was thinking about those science experiments where you've got the, what is it, the volcano? And you're pouring that stuff in, then all of a sudden it's
vinegar and
that's what I was picturing.
baking soda, baby. Those are fun.
I don't think I ever actually did it, so I didn't even know that it was baking soda, but
I did enough of them for both of us, so we're fine.
okay. That's great. That's great. All right. Now, you also mentioned agentic AI, and I want to just give a shout out over on my personal LinkedIn. We've got a couple of questions on there as well, which we are going to get to. So don't worry, keep them coming. We want to hear from you. But let's talk a little bit about agentic AI. Like, what is it? How do AI agents interacting and collaborating with one another deliver supply chain outcomes? I think we're throwing around these terms. I don't know if it's understood by everybody in the industry who's maybe looking at it as an investment, maybe looking to use it as to what the actual power is
Yeah.
in an AI agent to help us collaborate and provide those supply chain outcomes that we're looking for.
Yeah. I'll give you a real world example of an agentic agent and the concept of where it's going, because it's getting more and more advanced, right? So a simple good example would be, hey, how do I set up an agent that's constantly monitoring my actual lead time for delivery, right? And comparing that lead time against what my lead time in the system is when I'm doing the manufacture, when I'm setting up my assumptions for planning for inventory. It can identify where lead time is all of a sudden, my average lead time for this item is actually 13 weeks, even though the system tells me it's 3 weeks. Great. Like, should I be updating that system lead time from 3 weeks to 13 weeks? You can start to set up parameters and have it automatically make those kinds of changes for you. So again, going from an exception dashboard to, great, I've got an outlier detection based model, and it not only detects those outliers, but it fixes those outliers, right? So that's a simple example of what agentic would do. And I think the vision, I'm going to call it the vision because I still think it's really evolving right now, but the vision is that those agents that can then automate those dashboards and those assumptions are going to just get smarter and smarter and smarter. So today, reality is in most cases, you're going in and the business is looking at them and they're saying, great, okay, I've seen this exception 25 times. I always make this decision. You know what? I'm going to let the agent do it itself now for me. Right. That's the kind of training, like early on you were talking about, like that's the real world kind of training that you've got to do, because if you don't do that with the users, they just don't believe it and they don't trust it. Now we got a whole new generation of people that are becoming supply chain planners, right? My daughters are 24 years old. They're in the world and like they're using stuff being automated. They're okay with it. They actually don't care as much if they understand it, as long as they know it's working.
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah, it worked, right? That's how they run their lives. And so I think that the agents are going to continue to get better, and the user community is also going to get more comfortable with agents doing things on their behalf. And so agents are going to start to be able to get smarter and make those recommendations on your behalf, right? And actually identify new outliers and make recommendations of what those changes are. And so we're starting to see this as an example in our retail replenishment technology. We acquired a business called Syrup that's got really advanced analytics for replenishment planning for stores. And it's like going from riding a bike to, flying an airplane. You set up the parameters of like, where am I going to land and how fast do I want to go and what, what's my navigational path, and you just let it run. Versus you got to pedal everywhere. It's very much automated, but there's still exceptions. When something comes up, instead of you having to go in and then, grab the steering wheel and pull up or go down, you can basically just change the parameters in there, or it will make a recommendation for you and say, here's what we recommend. We think you should, think you should waste these 5 things. You just accept it, right? And then it starts to learn what you accept, and then it'll take what you're doing and automate that process.
Talk about instant gratification. You go from riding a bike to flying an airplane. I mean, who doesn't want that?
But it's scary, Sarah, right? It's scary.
Oh, no, it absolutely is.
I mean, there's a lot of people like, I don't want to fly an airplane. I'm happy riding my bike. So
yeah, it's true. Well, and you said a few things that I wanted to point out there. Detect and fix. Right. So we can use those AI agents not only to just detect, but also detect and fix, which I think is super important. And then you talked about the training. And I think sometimes when we're interpreting the solutions or the ideas or some of the things that are coming back to us, part of the training has to be in the bias. You mentioned something about questioning too much. Sometimes we're like questioning things too much, and we just need to sort of let it happen and then see the results, but also make sure that our bias isn't coming into play when we're interpreting that.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I just thought it was an important point to put out there. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about AI-powered sustainability and circular economy management. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because I saw some of the conversations around sustainability noticeably shrink in 2025. But I think the fact is, goals still need to be met. I think organizations still have these sustainability goals. And I think that at this point in time, when we're talking about AI, it's important for us to look at AI to really help us bring it back to the priority list, right? Help those already stretched supply chain teams push sustainability back up to the priority list, because I think for a lot of folks, that's where a lot of some of the impact that they're making, some of the things that they can be really, really proud of, right? And so how do we use the AI technology? How can AI really drive impact? And what could that level of data and understanding mean for businesses and the industry?
Yeah. Well, you're right. And it's frustrating and sort of sad to see it become less in the limelight. But I think that you're right. It is still something that we're all still pushing. And we're still seeing our biggest and best customers pushing it, right? And I think the good news is, the hyperscalers and some of these super high margin customers are really still focused on it and pushing it. And they're making the investments that will then create the foundation that other companies can use to scale it.
Right.
So that's really important. I think that in supply chain, we think about supply chain, I think we all have a responsibility to think in terms of sustainability and circularity because we have a huge impact we can make a huge impact on that, right? Like what we do, if we deliver more efficiently, we are improving sustainability, right? We, instead of having to ship, 1,000 shipments, we ship 500 shipments, we just reduced the footprint by 50%, right? There's a direct correlation. So if I'm a retailer and I've got 50% split shipments, when somebody orders a package, they get 2 instead of 1, cut it back, get them 1, like that's a huge impact. And so one of the things, it's a simple thing, but look, at the end of the day, what you measure gets done, right? Because you're looking at it every day. So start to build when you do your business cases for projects and when you put together your performance dashboards, have a sustainability metric in there, have a couple of like that should be a core part of your ROI. Great. I'm improving efficiency by XYZ. I'm improving, margin by Q, and by the way, I'm reducing the carbon footprint by Y. Like that should be part of the ROI. And if you start to measure it and you're tracking it as you go, guess what? It's going to get improved. Like that's important.
Well, and using the technologies that are available to us, including, obviously AI, to make sure that we can, do this a lot easier, right? Working easier, working smarter, not harder. Because listen, there's disruptions, there's challenges all over the industry. We don't want to put any more on people's plates, but there are a lot of different directions that we're pulling our professionals and our leaders in when it comes to supply chain. And we need to arm them and empower them with the right tools to be able to do that, so they're not getting bogged down with, obviously the manual effort. So I want to get to some audience questions. We've got a lot of them. So if we don't get to all of them, I just want to let you know we are going to be tagging EJ and the team to be able to answer those within the comments after the show. So let's get started with this one from YouTube. I'm sorry I don't know your name because it says your handle, but what are you seeing as the strongest object movers to get organizations to listen? Is it cost, response time, skill gap bridge, decisions, or maybe a combination?
A good compelling event makes a huge difference. So I think it's a little bit of all of those things, but I think, really, as you think about driving these kinds of initiatives, I do think understanding what is top of mind for the business, and that might be improving margins, that might be, driving top line revenue, that might be reducing costs. Understanding what makes your organization tick and like what's important to your senior leaders is what you should be using to help sell this internally, right? So listen to your leaders, listen to what they're talking about, and talk in their terms. I think ROIs are easy in supply chain for these kinds of projects. So put together an ROI and build a business case, right? And then use that business case not only to get approval to kick off these kinds of projects, but use it to track performance and use it to drive change management. So once you've got a project kicked off, remind the entire team why we're doing this. This is the business case. Here's the value we're going to be getting. And it's going to be different. Yes, you're going to have to learn something new. You might have to give up something that you love. You might be asked to do something new that you didn't have to do before. But like, here's why we're doing it. And that should be like, whatever that business case is, should be part of not only getting the approval to do the projects, but also how do you drive change management and adoption over time?
Yeah, I like the fact that you said remind them of the why.
Yeah.
I think so often we just feel like everybody should know it. And sometimes it gets interpreted differently, just depending on the conversation or the day or whatever that looks like. And so I think you're right, spot on with that, and the fact that we do need to remind everybody of the why, and such a great foundation for change management. Now, I've got another question here. Which areas of supply chain procurement do you think will yield the fastest ROI from AI? EJ, we're putting you on the spot. So if you say the wrong thing, everybody's going to come after you. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I think that the easiest place to start is often in demand planning, right? So think about if you've got a better demand signal, right? It makes your supply planning easier. It makes S&OP easier. It makes inventory planning easier. It makes procurement easier. So I think if you truly don't have anything, I'd suggest starting with a really intelligent demand planning process, forecasting process. And I would highly recommend you use analytics to drive recommendations on that. You start to track, good old fashioned performance metrics around it. You track the automation that you can do around that. How do you make the process faster and easier as well as more accurate? And you start to, that's an easy one then to connect upstream and downstream to, and start to get the buy-in across your organization, because you can connect that. If you're if you're in B2B, you can connect that back to the sales planning process. What are the big deals and how are those going to impact my number? If you're CPG, you can tie that back to trade promotion planning. Like how do we understand the promotions we have and what's the impact of that on our forecast, and where should we start to use promotions strategically to steer the demand, right? Mm-hmm. Either faster or slower and that kind of stuff. So I think that's a great place to start. I think there's also some really cool just visualization tools that you can use with AI to sort of help get people access to data. So some of these co-planner, co-modeling, we call them analyst in Anaplan, using tools like analyst to be able to get visualizations into your extended leadership team's hands faster. So mm-hmm. Back to communication, the planners often know what's going on, but like their leaders don't. Their leaders, I don't know what the plan is. Great. Right. You can start to give these tools to them, and instead of them having to go into a dashboard, they can just ask a question and instantly get access to data. And so, data, information is power. So you get that in people's hands, they start to ask good questions and they start to care about it more. They're going to invest into it too as well.
Yeah. Well, great questions is, I almost think that we need to be able to be answering or asking the right questions and good questions to be able to have the communication in the first place. Yep. And sometimes we don't even know what that looks like. And so just talking about it internally as to where are we going? What does that look like? Reminding them of the why, then people can start asking the questions and getting buy-in. Now, Ashok over on my personal LinkedIn, what are your views on how EPM platforms like Anaplan leverage AI agents? Will they help augment planning capabilities?
Look, we've got a lot of customers that are coming to us and transitioning from the old world of saying, great, help me improve my forecast or help me, get to this level of accuracy to, hey, how do I help my team to do stuff faster or with less resources, right? So I don't think people are necessarily all that often coming saying, hey, I want to cut my planning team from 100 people to 50 people. But they are saying, how do I not have to go from 100 people to 200 people when I double my business?
Right.
How do I do it more efficient? And to your point, like, how do I let those same resources spend time on other things? How do they let them start having mind share to do things like look at circularity and impact of that sustainability and the overall business? How do I let them spend their time running intelligent scenarios instead of just getting the plan in place and that kind of stuff too?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. One more, and it's from a LinkedIn user. I'm sorry, I can't see your name. They said, this is the nail on the head. AI as a partner having the trust. One thing I keep seeing is that AI adoption slows down when it stays abstract. Once it is anchored to real operational constraints like safety, throughput, labor availability, and physical movement, it either proves value quickly or gets rejected. Are others seeing the same shift? What are you finding actually drives trust and real scale in production environments? I think that's a great question.
I think it's a great question. It goes back to, how do you shift people's mindset to using AI? And we've had this struggle for years with explainability of forecasting as a simple example. And it's not any different when you're using Gen AI and other tools. But I will say one of the cool things I'm seeing with Gen AI, and again, we call it the analyst, is not only can it give you access to data, but it can actually help you with explainability, right? So we can start to use Gen AI to say, okay, well, great, I'm looking at this forecast. Where did that come from? Like, why is that forecast so much higher than it was last week? You can ask it those kinds of questions, and it can actually then query back, and it knows how to navigate through the applications and get to the answers. Oh, well, look, there were 4 promotions last week, and that's why it bumped up by this, and this. Or there's a huge deal in the pipeline, and so we've increased it based on this pipeline. So I think we can start to use Gen AI to actually help us with explainability types of questions, which is a really cool concept of how to use Gen AI. I think the other area that Gen AI is helping with, back to kind of the new generation of planners, we're seeing lots of customers that have new planners that don't necessarily know how to interpret scenarios, right? So they've run 4 or 5 different scenarios. The system may have generated them for them, and they don't really know how to interpret them, right? They don't really, they're just looking at, there's a lot of data. So we're starting to use Gen AI to actually interpret those scenarios for them and write it down. So, hey, scenario A versus scenario B, we see that, in Q2 and Q4, the forecast is up by 10%. This has an impact of XYZ percent on margin, but there's a, correlative, challenge with supply because of this, and this. So it almost writes like the executive summary for the scenarios to do the comparison, which is a great way to to provide explainability with the planning processes and help the planners do a better job at making decisions versus just automating decisions for them.
Yeah. And who doesn't want to do that, right? So I want to give a shout out to Bill. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. You've been really great in the comments. And I know we didn't get to your question, but I promise I'm going to tag EJ and everybody's going to get back to you. Same with a few other questions that we have over on my personal LinkedIn as well. I've got 2 more questions for you. We only have 5 minutes. So very quickly, how can businesses evaluate their operations to understand which of these trends might work for them in the short, mid, and longer terms?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. I mean, if you haven't done it, you should do some level of benchmarking to understand where is your maturity in your processes, right? So from a process and a systems perspective and probably a data perspective, get a handle quickly on like, great, where am I early stage and where am I mature? And use that to help you prioritize what you should do first, second, third. We do these kinds of things with customers, Sarah. So we're happy to come in and help companies understand what is their current maturity and, what's their vision of North Star of where they want to get to, and then create a path to get there, right? These things are not that hard to do if you break them down into bite-sized chunks and start somewhere. Start wherever, you've got the biggest like reward. It's a combination usually of like biggest opportunity and data and people readiness, right? So you can have the biggest opportunity, but you don't have the data, you don't have the people. Hard to start there. You want something that's got a good opportunity to solve, and you've got data and people that are willing to make the changes. Great. Start there and then roll forward.
Absolutely. So let's end here with some practical steps. So what are some of the practical steps businesses can take to move towards the successful, right? Successful meaning the right word here, implementation of some of these AI trends.
Yeah. Get business alignment. So get buy-in from leadership to make investments in doing this right? Put together your ROI, put together a vision, and get alignment with the business that you want to do this kind of thing first, right? Second, and maybe in parallel, start thinking about your data. What data do you have that's available? And then once you've got that vision and you've got the data moving, start somewhere. So I think that the key to is just like take the first step, right? And do something and prove it out and have a clear way to make it not just a science project, but make it tangible, right? So I always say, this has been a thing for years with data science is you do data science and you make it sort of this science project, but it's not tied back to a real world result.
Right.
It's like becomes noise, and then people give up on it, like, data science, I don't want to use it. Make it tangible, make it really tied back to something that's going to drive value. So you can say, great, we did this proof of concept, we drove this value, great, let's automate it. Now you funded your next project.
Yeah, because that motivates, it empowers. That's the whole point of all of this, right? We want to motivate and empower the folks that are doing the work on a daily basis. And what does that look like? But what does success look like too? How do we set them up for success with the foundation of what that needs to look like? What are our gaps? What else do we need? What do we have already? And what does that look like as far as high quality data and things like that? Well, that's all the time we have for this. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us today. Yeah. There are so many trends we could have talked about, so many areas of potential, but I think we've given our listeners today some really solid foundations to build on for 2026. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how businesses move beyond the AI hype this year and really into the era of real effective change. Now, just a quick reminder to grab the QR code or the link in the comments for that white paper that we are sharing with you today. Definitely a great resource and an asset. So go and get that, finalizing supply chain decision making. And also, you're going to be at NRF, which I think is coming up very shortly, and you can meet EJ there. Is that right?
That's right. New York.
Awesome.
Good times.
Awesome. So if you're going to be at NRF, go and meet EJ. And if you're looking for a partner to help you deploy supply chain AI with intent, scalability, and real business value to turn isolated experiments or science experiments, as we talked about today, into enterprise-wide impact, check out Anaplan.com. Big thank you to EJ for sharing your thoughts with me today. Thank you so much for joining me for the show.
Thank you, Sarah.